In the early 2000s, there used to be this music station for kids called Cool Kids FM Radio, and it was booming with a bunch of kids and parents in my town. Even I was hooked on it when my parents played it in the car, so my virgin ears weren't tainted. Cool Kids Radio played songs with genres ranging from bands like Simple Plan to some generic rap anthems that were acceptable for kids to listen to. And of course, rarely but surely censor words when needed. Based on what I just said, there should be no issues at all happening with the station. However, there was one day in particular where I remember riding around in the car with my mom on a Friday afternoon after school, tending to her errands. As we drove into the post office's parking lot, she asked if I wanted to keep the car on to listen to the radio, and I obliged, as I didn't bring my DS with me, so music was the next best thing. I cycled through some stations until I stopped at Cool Kids FM. At the time I was in middle school, and the last time I listened to the station was when I was 8, so I thought it couldn't hurt to get all nostalgic. Crush 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 by Paramore was playing, and as I was getting lost in the song, a sharp static noise cut through and completely trashed the audio. Wincing from the sound, I reached for the volume slider, but the static suddenly stopped. A minute of absolute silence was off-putting, and then, as if it had a jolt of life, the radio regained its audio. There wasn't any music playing though, and there wasn't an announcement for technical difficulties. There was just a long beep, and all of a sudden a voice that I could only describe as gravelly and rough started saying numbers: 7, 19, 45, 6, 15, 44, 9, 1, 50, 29, 31, 25, 0, 5. Those are the numbers I remember at least, because when I woke up I found myself in the hospital. There were bandages on my arms and thighs, and I was surrounded by my mom, dad, and my 2 younger brothers. I sat there confused and wondered how I even got into this position. "What's going on?" I asked, puzzled and still groggy from the pain medication that was in my system. My mom shot daggers at me with her eyes. It looked like she had been crying for hours. "What's going on is that I came back into the car to you hurting yourself. What were you thinking?" My mom shot back at me, barely containing her emotions. Hurting myself? I had only blacked out for 5 minutes at most, so how could I have hurt myself if I blacked out? My mind was racing feverishly, trying to answer questions that I had no knowledge about. I stumbled for words to tell my mom, and how to make "I don't know" sound like a reasonable explanation. Just then, as if they popped up from thin air, these 2 men wearing suits came into my room. "You must be the Thompsons, right? The one with the buzzcut and thin beard," spoke suddenly as he knocked on the hospital door. My dad shot straight up from his seat. "Yes, could I ask who you 2 are? This is a private family matter," he responded with a firmness in his voice. A man with the buzzcut pulled out a badge, and the one with slick hair followed suit. "Apologies, I'm Agent Kensler, and this is Agent Wilson. We're with the CIA." I looked at both of them with wide eyes and started slowly putting together the events in my head. "There's been cases similar to your son regarding certain radio station incidents. We wanted to ask your son and your wife a few questions, if that would be okay with you," Agent Kensler said, keeping his stoic attitude when he spoke. My dad obliged and took my younger brothers out of the room. They took one last look at me with tears in their eyes and slowly walked out of the room. My father was closely behind them, patting their backs and escorting them out solemnly. Kensler then pulled up a chair next to my bed and started his array of questions. "So Roy, could you tell me what you remember from earlier today?" he asked as he pulled out a notepad and a pen. I told him that I only remembered turning to Cool Kids FM and listening to the songs, when suddenly the static cut the signal and the numbers started to play when it came back on. I told him that after I heard the numbers I blacked out. I thought I had just fallen asleep or something. My mom, however, told the detectives the events of what happened after I blacked out, and it chilled me to my very core. My mom was coming back to the car after sitting in the long line waiting to drop off her package. As she was getting closer to the car, she saw me sitting perfectly still, just sitting still and looking forward. I didn't dare to move an inch, and even when my mom was close enough for me to hear her footsteps, I refused to move. Feeling uneasy, she hurried over to her side and opened the door. That's when she saw me with slashes across my arms and stabbing myself in the legs in a rhythmic fashion with a box cutter that was in the glove compartment. She then said I looked over and flashed the most unnerving grin while having tears in my eyes and showing her the fresh cuts on my wrist. She said she started to cry as she took the box cutter from me and screamed at me to snap out of whatever I was in. But it was only when she turned off the radio did I completely go limp. She started to panic, but quickly pulled herself together as she then used whatever she could find to try to stop the bleeding as much as possible. Until we got to the hospital, I could tell by her face as she recalled these events that she was scared out of her mind, especially since I was considered touch and go due to the fair amount of cuts I inflicted on myself. Agent Kensler, hearing all that he had to hear, thanked us for our cooperation and headed out the door with Agent Wilson following closely behind him. I spent the night in the hospital wondering about the other kids that could have heard that number broadcast and had nightmares, wondering what they did once they heard it. That following morning I was discharged and tried my hardest to find Cool Kids FM on the radio I had in my room. To my surprise, there was no more Cool Kids FM, and all that was left in place from the station frequency was white noise. No numbers, no songs, just static. I found out later on that a lot of kids in my area died from bizarre suicides, biting their tongues, jumping out of moving cars, slashing their wrists, and the list kept piling on and on. I was one of the lucky ones that survived. We held a vigil for the lives of the children the week after the incident. It was peaceful, and at the same time you could feel the somber air suffocate you. Cool Kids FM became a defunct radio station after this particular incident because even if they were hijacked like they claimed to be, it was too much of a risk to keep running. I still tune into the station from time to time, seeing if the static will crackle and gain life once more, but to this day all I hear is the static. Sometimes I even hear the numbers faintly, but I put it off as just my imagination. Maybe it was just survivor's guilt rotting my brain, or maybe, somewhere in the static, the numbers are still there, patiently waiting to be listened to once again.